What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this year I've played a fair amount of video games, especially a fair amount of brand new video games. ROM hacks aside, because again, I've played my fair share of Pokemon ROM hacks like Pokemon Unbound, Pokemon Gaia, Super Mario Mon, and even Pokemon Renegade Platinum. However, if we're talking about new video games, I've played a fair amount of them, and considering the likes of YouTubers like Jack the Lightning Ripper, Benjamage, and Arrow Dragon 2 have created, lists of video games that they've played throughout the year, I decided, why not take a look back over 2025 and see what video games I've played this year. So, that being said, it's time to count down my top 10 video games that I played this year, 2025. For those that don't know, of course, the main rule is the cutoff is, basically last week. So, yeah. Anything past, I believe, December 17th is basically invalid. So, any game I get for Christmas is basically, out of luck. So, that being said, without further ado, let's get started. Starting off first at number 10, we have WarioWare Mega Micro Games. Alright, we're starting this one off with something that, honestly, I have never played since I was in, middle school or high school when I got my first DS. Yeah, when I got my first DS, I was experiencing with more franchises because of, in certain aspects, I was being forced to stop playing Pokemon in order to make friends. Which is weird once you consider that I'm autistic. And it's But in this case, one of the games I ended up discovering was a little game known as WarioWare Touched. And oh boy, I enjoyed it. You would think I would be into the WarioWare franchise after that point, but nope. After high school and going into college, back to Pokemon, and then adding into Fire Emblem. So, it was mostly just the Pokemon Fire Emblem show for me from that point on. And I just recently got back into branching out into other different video game franchises. So, the fact I essentially decided, you know what? Why not play through WarioWare Mega Micro Games? And for the Game Boy Advance, since I never really played it before. And, honestly, in fairness, considering the Nintendo Switch Online system actually has this for the Game Boy Advance on its emulator, it was, kind of challenging to face off against. Had a few where I had a few growing pains within the game where I had a hard time just trying to figure out each of these moments where each of the mechanics of each area. But in this case, I enjoyed it all the same. And honestly, I want to try and find some more WarioWare games, or in the near future, that I could at least play through. And naturally, since I have a Switch, that means the Switch titles will possibly be on the docket in the near future. Here's hoping. Moving on next at number 9, we have Killer Instinct. Yeah. Honestly, speaking of video games I don't play through that much, I'm not that much of a fan of fighting games. Which really says a lot when you consider that I'm not a big competitive gamer in particular. In fact, the only fighting game I've ever played was, well, the Smash Brothers franchise. However, that being said, as if you remember from when I meant my previous entry, that the number 10 entry, that I recently decided to branch out into other franchises, I did the exact same thing with fighting games. And surprisingly enough, this year I played through 3 fighting games specifically. Obviously, one of them being Fatal Fury Special for the SNES, which introduced me to the world of the SNK franchise, which I had to play through in order to get info on Mai Shiranui. The second being, of course, Guilty Gear Advance, which I played on my phone, because honestly, it's not on the Nintendo Switch Online emulator. Seriously, Nintendo, we have Guilty Gear Strive on the Nintendo Switch store. Why not put Guilty Gear Advance on the Game Boy Advance emulator? Just seriously. But of course, that being said, one of the most notable ones is Killer Instinct for the SNES, which I played through a good amount of it. And yeah, while I did essentially do that in order to get some info on Jago for my top 10 ninjas in video games list, honestly, when I initially started playing through Killer Instinct, I played through as Orchid, Jago's sister. Namely because I heard about the whole, well, yeah. And honestly, I never realized that how hard fighting games can be. But considering how I'm not, if not persistent, yeah, there's a good chance I'm really going to enjoy playing through it in the near future. Plus, if I end up getting into Killer Instinct 64 for the N64, maybe this might end up getting me into playing through Killer Instinct 2013 reboot. Hey, I got a Steam account. Why not? Moving on next at number 8, we have Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Yeah. Moving on next, we have a game that, honestly, I kind of had a bit of an interest in, but yeah, again, I've never had the initiative to want to play. And yeah, if you already hadn't guessed, many of these are kind of the first time I played through them. And especially in terms of Castlevania, as it was thanks to both the Quarter Guy and the Castlevania Castlevania series on Netflix, that basically kind of gave me a bit more of a motivation to at least try and play through a game. And this year I actually downloaded Castlevania Aria of Sorrow onto one of my phones. Or onto my phone. And yes, don't worry, this is basically the only game this is the only game I've emulated on my phone. So, yeah. So, just really to say, most of the others involve actual hardware. But even with that, the fact that I started with the Soma Cruise saga rather than the saga involving any of the Belmonts really says a lot. But in fairness, I decided to play through Castlevania Aria of Sorrow this past October as a bit of a tie-in with the Halloween season. And honestly, it's really enjoyable to say the least. And it's kind of funny to see the more macabre atmosphere that the Castlevania series entwines. Not only that, I want to at least try and find a way to get back into playing through Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, but it really does say a lot once you realize I've been a little busy and a little swamped. Yeah, if you hadn't already guessed, many of these games I didn't get that far in because, yeah, I've been swamped with a lot of stuff, so, yeah. But in all fairness, considering next year's another year, I might try and branch out to any of the other Castlevania titles. Here's hoping. Moving on next at number 7, we have Breath of Fire. Going back to the SNES, honestly, if you already hadn't guessed, most of these are going to be for the Game Boy Advance or the SNES, because naturally they're kind of ones I'm more or less used to. And since I'm a very big fan of RPGs, I decided to take a look at Breath of Fire. And honestly, Breath of Fire is one of those games that, honestly, he is very different than what I'm used to. And take it from someone who has played through a lot of Fire Emblem and Pokemon, it was very apparent that this one was one of those that was going to be very different. And yes, Breath of Fire is pretty fun to say the least. Granted, I did basically have to do a lot of grinding, and while I was a bit stymied due to the night captain in the first dungeon area, in the first castle dungeon in the area, it was kind of fun to say the least. Plus, I got to the second part where you basically control the second party member, Nina. And honestly, I'm looking forward to wanting to basically getting back to playing through the game. Really says a lot when you think about it. Moving on next at number 6, we have Mario Kart World. Yeah, this year was a very big year for Nintendo, especially since with the release of the Nintendo Switch 2, a console that I was basically looking forward to. However, due to monetary pressures and a lot of other outside pressures, I didn't have the means of getting it. So, however, one of the biggest ones I wanted to play through was, of course, Mario Kart World, since, as you've already noticed, I've had an interesting relationship with the Mario Kart franchise. So, I wanted to play through the recent entry to see what it was like. And I got a chance to do so after visiting Yestercades in Red Bank. And while I did play through Mario Party 8, I decided now's the best chance to take a look at Mario Kart World. And honestly, I was blown away. Naturally, racing games are one of my favorites. And considering the Mario Kart franchise as a whole being one of my favorites, it's kind of fair enough that I would enjoy it. But the fact that the more road trip style feel of the Mario Kart World's tracks really made a perfect amount of sense with the series. And honestly, I hope I'll get this game later on so I can see what this baby is really made of. Rev up those engines, folks. I'm getting into it. This will be continued in part 2.